Hello everyone, this is Dr. Ilyas from the Department of Education, Hazara University, Mansehra. Research in general and also research in social sciences is one of the ways of knowing phenomena or one of the ways in which we actually get knowledge related to things that we need to know about. So in this brief presentation, I would like to discuss research in social sciences as the scientific way of knowing. As we know that there are different ways of knowing, so let us begin with an initial understanding of what are different ways in which we actually acquire knowledge about social phenomena. And so the sources of knowledge or the ways of knowing, there are different ways and different sources of knowledge that have been identified by researchers, and these include experience, reasoning, and authority as some of the most prominent sources of knowledge. Experience actually is knowing through the use of our senses, or in other words, experiencing social phenomena, social or also natural phenomena. So we actually, when we are making use of our experience to get knowledge, some of the senses that we make use of include our senses of smell and our sense of touch and taste and our sight and hearing. So experiencing through our senses is an important source of knowledge. Then we have reasoning. And so as we know, human beings are called reasoning animals as well. Use of logic to make judgments. We as human beings make use of logic. And so there are two types of logic, including inductive logic and deductive logic, or inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. And in both cases, logic actually helps us in getting to generalizations and inferencing based on our reason. And so the use of logic, both in its inductive sense and in its deductive sense. Induction actually, a very common sense understanding of induction is that when we are understanding through the use of induction, we actually go and understand the general on the basis of our specific experiences. In other words, we begin with examples, and then that leads to the generation of theory related to certain phenomena. For example, we see that a human being dies, and then we see another human being dies, and then we see another human being dies, and that actually leads to a generalization, and that is that humans are mortal. The reverse of it is deduction, where actually we have some theory that we apply on specific examples. So the theory is that humans are mortal. And so if we come across a human, we would think of him as a mortal. And so these examples, these are very general examples. There are more complexities involved in the process of induction and deduction as sources of knowledge that we can go to in some future discussion. Then authority is another source of knowledge. Authority actually is credible or trusted source or sources of knowledge. So as we see that in our daily life, there are a number of authoritative figures or authority voices that actually are helpful actually in giving us knowledge. And so, for example, religion could be considered as a source of knowledge that comes through some authority. Similarly, in many cases, scientists, prominent scientists could be considered as someone's who might be considered by many as authoritative voices in terms of getting knowledge. So knowledge or theories that come from them will be considered as authoritative in the field. All of these different sources of knowledge, that is experience and reasoning and authority, have their own pluses, have their own benefits and strengths, but each of these ways of knowing might also have their own limitations. Our experiences could, in many cases, might lead to faulty generalizations. Similarly, we can use our reasoning to get to generalizations that might not be very accurate. And similarly, knowledge that comes through authority might not be, in some cases, might not be accurate or credible in some instances. So all of these different sources of knowledge have their own limitations. Now we move on to research as a source of knowledge. And so research has been considered as a systematic way of knowing. In other words, this research is actually systematic and organized use of experience, reasoning, or logic, that is induction and deduction, and authority could lead to knowing that is more authentic, rigorous, and credible. So those primary sources of knowledge that actually is our experiences and our rationality or reasoning or our logic. And similarly, knowledge that comes through authorities, when these sources of knowledge are used in a more systematic and organized way, that could be considered as a systematic way of knowledge or research. Research in social sciences is actually the formal, systematic, deliberate inquiry that is aimed at finding answers to our research questions regarding social phenomena. And so research questions are actually are often based on our experiences and observations. So generally, as social beings, we have certain experiences and certain observations that lead to some research questions. For example, in the educational context, we observe, for example, that the teacher is talking and the students are listening in a class system. So a research question could be, why is it that it is mostly in traditional classroom structures, why is it that the teacher is actually talking most of the time while the students are listening? Or in other words, what are the benefits and what are the disadvantages of this type of a class structure or this type of an educational structure? So this is a research question that has come out as a result of our observation and experience, and then this can lead to further exploring this particular research question in order to get answers. Then, research as the scientific method. Research is actually the scientific method of knowing, or the scientific method of exploring phenomena. And this is the scientific method because it follows the scientific method because it refers to the systematic formulation and articulation of research questions and or hypotheses or objectives in the light of our observations and experiences. So as I mentioned in the above slide, that our observations and our experiences actually lead to certain questions on our minds or to some hypotheses, and that actually lead to research objectives. So this systematic formulation of these research and articulation of these research questions and hypotheses and objectives in the light of our observations and experiences could be considered as the research method. Then the development and application of a research plan, design, that is data collection and analysis. The research method, the research as a scientific method. After we have developed our research questions and research hypotheses, or we have actually developed our research objectives, the next step involved is the development and application of the research design in order to find answers to our research questions or to explore our hypotheses. And so the research design or research plan actually further includes the processes of data collection and analysis. So once data is collected and data is analyzed, the ultimate result of that is to get to findings and conclusions. And these findings and conclusions are actually predictions or explanations or descriptions. And that predictions, explanations, or descriptions will actually depend on our research questions, research hypotheses, and also on the way we actually explore the issue. In other words, the predictions and explanations and descriptions of our findings will actually depend on our research design as well. So we are now moving on to the end of this particular presentation, and that is the characteristics of research and the characteristics as a scientific method. So what are some of the characteristics of research that actually makes it scientific, a scientific process, or a process of knowing through the scientific method? One of the most important characteristics of research that makes it the scientific process is replicability of the research process. This actually means repeatability of the process and the product of research. And that actually means that the research process is elaborate and that it can be repeated, and it can be replicated in similar situations and with similar product or similar results. So replicability is something that is an important aspect of research as a scientific method. The second one is falsifiability, and that actually means that research process, the research outcomes could actually be challenged, and so the process of research, the rationalization of the research process, and the outcomes of research, that is actually the research results, are open to challenge, they are open to questioning, they are open to further exploration, and they are open to alternative interpretation. And so this is something that is this is not like authoritative knowledge that you cannot challenge. This is something that is falsifiable. And the next characteristic of research as a scientific method is precision, which actually means the accuracy of the research questions. So the research questions are concrete, they are accurate, and in terms of the objectives and in terms of or the research hypotheses, they are actually accurately described in the research process and especially in the research report. So the accuracy of the research question, hypotheses, research objectives, and the accuracy of the research processes and outcomes, that is generally called precision, is something that is an important characteristic of the research of research as a scientific method. And lastly, parsimony, which actually means humility or carefulness in terms of making research claims. So the researchers do not make big claims. They do not make claims that actually go beyond the scope of the research process or the research product, or actually the limits of their particular research designs. So parsimony or humility and carefulness is something that is